weeks we have all the unit tests are done, and hopefully you guys have a chance to do all those. But office hours are still awesomely running, and I'll have office hours Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. At normal times, send out an email, and I'll probably try to give you some reminders. But take advantage of office hours. Like even if that's just like your time to be like, I'm going to make sure I spend at least 5 hours a week studying for the final. Just come into office hours, work on stuff, and then we can talk through issues that you're having as they come up. Even better would be to go over a unit or two, and then come in with any questions that you have on that unit. Each time we have office hours. But if you come in regularly, you can do two things. You can improve your understanding, hopefully, of the course material ahead of the final. So by the time you get all those review materials, you're ready to rock through them and apply the knowledge that you have instead of still trying to catch up on things that you might have missed. And then also it helps your participation grade. So remember that your participation grade pulls into, along with your problem sets, is 20% of your total grade. So it's the same as an exam. So you want to try to boost that as much as you can. All right, so other announcements. I will definitely have a review session. I often do 2 review sessions for the final just because there's so much information. So that will be to be announced in probably, I think I'm supposed to do that before finals actually start. So that'll probably be next week. But I'll let you guys know. Okay, any questions logistic-wise? Great. Okay, and I trust you all had wonderful Thanksgivings and ate lots of turkey and got cool Fox shirts. It's so now just seeing that shirt, I'm like, oh, what the Fox? Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. We gotta, get the energy levels up, ready to study some economics. Okay, so today we're going to go over asymmetric information. And the last chapter that you guys are responsible for this semester covers 3 main things. First is asymmetric information. Which we are going to go over today. The second is political economy. And typical for economists, we're not really giving that too much attention in class, and we don't have a lecture on it, so it's just what you have in the book is all you're going to get. So make sure you read that. So in general, political economy is kind of looking at the intersection of politics and economics. So it's a pretty interesting topic, especially if you're a political junkie and really into economics. I don't know, anyone else? I don't know, maybe. So it's interesting stuff. Oftentimes answers the questions of, well, here we have these great ideas in economics. Why don't we actually do that? So sometimes you can understand a little bit more about the gaps between theory and actual practice. And then the third one is behavioral economics. And this is my personal favorite, and I'm a little disappointed I don't get to actually give this lecture. But David Laibson did a great job the other week. So that's from David Laibson's talk. And I'm always happy to talk more about that in office hours, because like I said, kind of a thing. But today, asymmetric information, which is also definitely of interest for me with regards to my research, which I might talk a little bit about. Okay, so first of all, what do we mean by an information asymmetry? What would you guess that we mean by an information asymmetry? Yeah, Elizabeth?
Well, in any kind of transaction, when the information that the buyer has and the information the seller has are different.
Yes, exactly. So if the buyer and the seller, or whether it's a buyer or a seller or just like two parties to an economic transaction. It could be like an employee and employer, something like that, if they have different information. So, two parties to an economic transaction. Have different information. And usually we mean that one knows more than the other. So this can take two different forms. You can have either a hidden action, an example of a hidden action is, let's say that you're sitting in your cubicle and you're supposed to be working, but what percentage of workers are working 100% of the time during their 8-hour days? Probably fairly small percent. But actually, my favorite example of this is anyone into the NCAA tournament? Okay, yeah. Well, I'm very into the NCAA tournament.
Which sport?
Oh, I'm sorry. The NCAA basketball.
March Madness.
March Madness, exactly. So March Madness is, the first couple of days, the games are happening all day long, and I bet you could really measure the drop in U.S. productivity during those couple of days, because what happens is a lot of people are at work in their cubicles watching the games online through their computers. And what is awesome about this is that in the little box the window that comes up, that you're watching the game, it actually has a boss button, and it says boss button. And if you click it, then it goes from being the game to this fake screen of spreadsheets and emails. So you can switch. So if your boss comes by, you can hit the boss button and just people also get really good at the command tab. Someone walks by my computer, man, I wasn't on BuzzFeed, no. Okay, so hidden action is one of those things where you're hiding the fact that you are slacking off. So you can say hiding, slacking off. Okay. You're not going to tell your boss, oh yeah, I just watched a really great game. And the other type is you can have a hidden characteristic. And you could also look at this in the employee-employer context. If you're being hired, you're probably not going to walk into that interview and be like, yeah, I'm really smart, but I have this terrible Facebook addiction. It's crippling, really. I usually spend about 6 hours a day scanning the internet. This is not from personal experience, I swear. But you might have a hidden characteristic about yourself. Also with car markets, you could say I might, I just bought this new car. It's not a new car, it's a used car. We're going to talk more about used cars. It has this squeaky chair thing. It really bothers me. It's a hidden characteristic I didn't notice during the test drive. But so you might have hidden characteristics for something that you're selling. And also we're going to talk about that in terms of your health insurance. So basically, you have these information asymmetries, either in actions or characteristics that are known to one party and not to the other party. So this has two different forms, there's two main problems that arise, or two types of problems. The first problem is adverse selection. And the second is moral hazard. So we're going to spend most of the rest of the period talking about adverse selection and moral hazard. You can divide up these two different problems by thinking about whether it happens before a transaction or after a transaction. So an adverse selection happens before a transaction, while moral hazard happens after a transaction. And then we're going to have a special case that we're going to look at, a special case of asymmetric information is the principal agent problem. Okay, so let's start off with adverse selection. So we already said that it happens before a transaction. We know that information asymmetries have to be present in order for adverse selection to occur. But what do we mean by adverse selection? So the basic definition is that you have a situation where an uninformed party, so someone who has less information in an economic transaction, is going to attract the wrong kind of trading partner. So they, because that trading partner is better informed. Let's just lay out the definition. So a situation in which an uninformed party, uninformed or less informed, attracts undesirable trading partners. Because they are better informed. Okay, so you can come up with a lot of different examples of this. So a situation where one person's uninformed, and the other person knows a little bit more about what's going on. And so you're going to attract undesirable trading partners. So in some sense, I always think it's interesting to think about the dating market or the marriage market on these different issues. But you can definitely see where someone who is less informed might have some problems in attracting undesirable trading partners. We can also think more traditionally in terms of like used car markets is the classic example. And we're also going to talk about insurance, both car insurance, home insurance, and health insurance. And we're also those are like the main classic examples. Yeah.
You're talking about adverse selection in the dating market. Is it possible for each person to be both the more informed and the less informed person?
Yeah, I guess so. Because in some sense they could be informed on different aspects, like on different parts of the transaction. I guess, you could look at it that way. I think we'll stick with the used car market. It's a little more straightforward. George Akerlof, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, in fact he won the Nobel Prize for this asymmetric information idea. He's also now famously the husband of Janet Yellen, who is likely to be our new Fed chair. So George Akerlof talked about the used car markets in his paper, The Market for Lemons. And so let's walk through and talk about how adverse selection might come into play in a used car market and cause problems for that market. So let's say that I have a car that I'm thinking about selling. Now, first of all, am I more likely to sell that car or less likely to sell that car if it's kind of a crappy car and it has some issues, some mechanical problems, I don't want to keep taking it to the shop, versus if it's a super reliable, awesome car that never breaks down? Which one am I more likely to want to unload on the used car market? car that has lots of hidden problems. So if I have a car that I want to sell, I'm more likely to want to sell it if it is a lemon. And now if I'm a buyer of a car, I'm looking onto the used car market for a used vehicle, then when you're buying a car, are you able to you can test drive the car, you can look under the hood, you can kick the tires, but are you able to find out all the information about that car? Certainly not all of that information. Like I said, I didn't know about that squeaky chair that's annoying me now. Unfortunately, that's pretty minor. But you're definitely going to have a case where the seller of the car, who's already owned that car, knows a lot more about the characteristics of the car than the buyer. So we have our seller knows more than the buyer. And we also know that the sellers are more likely to sell a lemon than they are a nice car. I forget the word, what was it, cherry or some other nice fruit that they call the good cars. But so sellers are more likely to sell lemons. Okay, so if I'm a buyer and I can't really distinguish between the lemons and the good cars, and I also know that there's likely to be quite a few lemons in the market, then what happens to my willingness to pay for any used car? I can't tell the good from the bad, and I know there's going to be some bad in the mix. So what happens to your willingness to pay? Yeah, your willingness to pay goes down. Because I know that there's some percent chance that I'm going to end up buying a lemon. So that should change, that should reduce my willingness to pay for any car if I can't tell between the lemons and the good cars. So then the average price of the car in the car market, so the average price goes down. Okay. So now let's think about the sellers again. So let's say that the average price for a 2009 Honda Civic is $10,000. But I have a Honda Civic. Actually, we shouldn't say a Honda Civic, because Hondas are great. There's hardly any lemons. It's my bias. I have the Civic. So a Ford Taurus. I think they still make those. The average price is $10,000 for, let's say, a 2010 Ford Taurus. Now, let's say that I have a Ford Taurus that is a super reliable car. I've never had a problem. I keep it in the garage. I've got the maintenance on schedule. Everything's great. The average price is $10,000, but my car I know is worth $12,000. So if I sell my really, really nice Ford Taurus on the used car market, and I can only get $10,000, does that make me more or less likely to sell the car? Less likely. So now our average car value, the actual value, has gone down. Now let's say that I bought a Ford Taurus, some other guy has a Ford Taurus, it's kind of crappy, it has some issues, every couple months you have to take it to the shop, and it's spilled soda under the seat, and now it's all sticky and smells weird when it rains. And now that car is actually only worth $8,000, and I know that as the seller. But if I sell it on the used car market, I can sell it for $10,000 because the buyers aren't going to be able to tell all the information about this car. So am I more likely to sell it or less likely to sell it? You're more likely to sell it. So what's happening to the mix of cars that's in the used car market? The quality, the average quality, is going to continue to go down. And then so the buyers, realizing this, are going to be willing to pay even less. So maybe the average price is going to go down. So now the price starts dropping. Even more of those high quality cars are pulled out of the market. And only the low quality cars are remaining in the market. So basically you have this problem, so you have fewer high quality and more low quality. Cars, so you see the average price continues to go down, and we say that the market unravels in a sense, where like at the end of the day, if you take this to its logical extreme, all you have, you only have the crappiest cars in the market, and the price of those cars is equal to the value of the lowest of the lemon. So none of the good cars are in there, and only lemons are in. Market unravels. And so when the market unravels, that means that anyone going into this market, any buyer, should just assume that they're going to buy a lemon. So in some sense, like the market, unless you really want to buy a lemon for the lower and lower price, this market just almost fails entirely. So this is like the idea of using car market, where asymmetric information, where the seller knows more than the buyer, leads to this adverse selection where only the crappy cars are being put into the car market, and so the so the buyers are attracting all these crappy cars into the market. So that's kind of like the basic problem of adverse selection. So you can apply this problem to other markets. So one very interesting and highly relevant example these days is health insurance. So let's think about how adverse selection might apply to health insurance. So first of all, let's think of the uninformed party is going to be the insurer, the person offering health insurance, and the trading partners are the potential buyers of the potential insurers, those who are buying the insurance. So what might happen when we think about applying adverse selection to the health insurance market? You know, walk us through it?
All insurers may end up with people that bought insurance that are in the worst health than the insurers thought, and then they have to pay a lot more money.
Exactly. So the people that are most likely to buy insurance are those who are in poor health or have higher risks anyways, right? So then what does that do to the price of the premiums that the health insurance company should charge? Right, so the premium's going to go up. So let's say that you are a healthy 22-year-old who eats her vegetables every day, goes jogging, goes to bed at 10, never drinks or smokes or has any bad habits, and has grandparents that live to be 105. Never a day in hospital. So you're like the perfect low-risk person. And you don't skydive, you don't have any extreme sport hobbies. Are you likely to buy, what's your expected payoff? Think about your expected payoff from buying insurance is going to depend on how much you have to use the health coverage. So if I am like perfectly healthy and I have very low risk across the board, of course there's no zero risk. Anyone can get sick or get hit by a meteor or whatever. But I'm very unlikely to have to use health insurance. So my expected payoff when I buy insurance is pretty low. So maybe on average I might expect to use a couple $100 of insurance each or maybe like $500 of insurance each year. But the price of insurance, because the high-risk people are more likely to buy the insurance, the price is going to be much higher than my expected payoff. So then you have these other guys who are they're drinking themselves into oblivion every night and eating only pizza rolls and popcorn, and they smoke a pack a day, and their hobbies are all jumping and skydiving and whatnot. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's fast and what did they say? Better to well, never mind. I can't even quote freaking classic rock music. Better to burn out than to fade. Yeah. Okay. Maybe if you're a rock star. But you're definitely, from an insurance point of view, you don't want these guys. Like, they are exactly the wrong people that you would like to attract. And when you do attract them, because their payoff from insurance, from health insurance, is really high. Because you know, like, well, I'm pretty likely to break another bone from my cliff jumping, or I'm really likely to have, have some bronchitis from all the smoking. Yada yada. They're more likely to use the health services, so their payoff from buying insurance is much higher. So their willingness to pay for insurance should also be higher. And granted, like, we're kind of holding risk aversion constant because there's something to say about usually responsible people might be more likely to buy insurance than crazy people. But that aside, is that a no? Okay, sorry. So then what happens to the premiums? Premiums are going up. Now, only the high-risk people want to buy insurance, and even more of the low-risk people are willing to buy insurance because it's too expensive for their expected payoff. So then you lose more of these low-risk people. So then the average price of insurance goes up even more. So then the people who are like pretty healthy, they eat their vegetables and jog every day, but then they go snow skiing and sometimes break a leg here and there. Then they might even find it's not worth it to go buy insurance because the price has gone down. So then they drop out of the market and the premiums go up even higher. And then the average people start to feel like, well, it's not worth it for me to buy insurance because premiums are so high. So they drop out of the market and the prices go up even higher. And pretty soon, the only people that are staying in the insurance market are those at the highest risk who know that they're going to need a lot of care. And so the actual price of insurance at the end of this whole unraveling should be equal to the highest risk expected payoff. So in some sense, the insurance market just completely unravels. So how, we do see this happen to some extent. The percentage of people under the age of 30 that are insured is much, much lower than those in older brackets because they're less likely to have health issues. But insurers definitely have a few ways to try to kind of discriminate between different kinds of risks. Is that a hint?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's true, but also I think that the thing about health insurance is that it's so unpredictable that you never know if you're gonna get hit by a car, and I don't think people go into it necessarily being like, oh, I'm never gonna get hurt, I'm never gonna get sick, I'm never gonna need hospital care at all. So
Yeah.
I think that's the reason that it kind of still does work to some extent, and then the insurance companies as well, they change their premium and the insurance landscape for different kinds of people.
Right, and if you do have an issue, then it's often very expensive. So sometimes it's still worth it. But you're still gonna, once you bring in ideas like risk aversion and other types of behavior, you're gonna have people who are very risk averse are more likely to buy insurance, even if the expected payoff from buying the insurance is lower than the premium. So you're still gonna get some people in the market who are risk averse. And actually, those are the people that you want. You want the risk-averse people because they're probably also less likely to jump out of planes. But on the whole, on the average, you still see this problem where, on average, you have low-risk people are less likely to buy. Also, what about with people who are, what would happen if you're not sick now, but if you got hit by a car, or if you had that terrible thing happen, that you could just hop online, buy an insurance policy, and then go head to the hospital. Then how would that change?
Then you would never really want to.
Yeah. So then think, okay, well, if I get hurt, then I will, or if I get sick, then I don't have to buy insurance. or then I'll just go ahead and get insurance and then go to the hospital. So, insurers realize this, and they put into place a rule. So let's do it before the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, and after the Affordable Care Act. So what did insurers say to prevent the problem that Elizabeth has pointed out? Right, so pre-existing conditions are not covered. If your leg is already broken, sorry dude, you're not getting the hospital coverage for that. And also, if you already have cancer or if you already have some other issue, even more minor issues, they can deny coverage. So before, let's see, did not cover pre-existing conditions. And one of the features of Obamacare that people really love is now we'll cover pre-existing conditions. So after the Affordable Care Act, we will cover pre-existing conditions. What's the part of Obamacare that people aren't so crazy about? The mandate, right? The individual mandate. Everyone has to buy insurance. So insurance is required. And before, insurance was optional. Okay, so with regards to adverse selection, yeah, James?
Why did you say it's required? I don't understand.
So I said required because you just have to pay a fine if you don't get it. If you don't have insurance on your tax return, then you have to pay, I think it's really low right now. It's like $100 for the year, somewhere around that per person, as a fee, like a fine for not having insurance. Like in Massachusetts right now, we've had this mandate for a long time. It's more like, I think it's like $150 a month, not a year, but $150 a month if you don't have insurance. So there's a really big incentive to go ahead and buy your insurance in Massachusetts. The incentive is much smaller for the Obamacare, which makes me worry that it's not going to be as effective. It makes many economists and policymakers worry, but we'll see. So we have these two things going hand in hand. And so now you can kind of see, with regards to, what's the argument for this requiring insurance if you're going to cover pre-existing conditions in terms of adverse selection? Exactly. So then, like, we already have this adverse selection problem, which makes insurance more expensive. So even if, even without this, if we required insurance, premiums would go down for sure, because now everyone has to have insurance, and now everyone's in the pool, low risk, high risk, everyone. But if we start covering pre-existing conditions without having this insurance be required, then it really exacerbates the problem of like what would happen to the average premiums if you could just hop in anytime you wanted and have a pre-existing condition covered. Like premiums would go up a lot because no one would buy insurance unless they needed it. And in some sense, like that would cause the market to unravel even more. So these are like the two main conditions of the Affordable Care Act. All right, so that's adverse selection. So remember we have asymmetric information combined with the fact that it's before the transaction and you're attracting the wrong type of trading partner. Okay, so let's talk about moral hazard. So with moral hazard, we'll come back to the health insurance ideas. So moral hazard happens after a transaction. And this is the tendency, so basically, it's the tendency of a transaction to change the incentives for an individual and thus change their behavior. So it's a tendency of a transaction to change incentives and thus change behavior. So one of the fundamental things we learned about, remember, very, very first chapter of your Greg Mankiw text talks about how incentives shape behavior. And incentives cause people to behave in certain ways. And moral hazard changes your incentives. So it causes people to behave in different ways. So let's think about, okay, so you guys, who has insurance on their cell phone? Anyone? I have insurance on my cell phone. Like warranty, like where you pay like an extra? No, not like insurance. Yeah, so did you pay extra for the warranty on your cell phone? Well, if you did, let's say that there was a zero deductible or very low deductible. And, I got this HTC One, it's pretty good, but I kind of wish I would have got an iPhone. And, like, what if, I did pay for the insurance, and if there was a zero deductible, what might be more likely to happen if I decided I don't really want this phone anymore? Oops, I dropped it. Oh, that's sad. It's in the toilet now. Yeah, I mean, like, you might be less likely to be really careful about that phone if you know that you can go and get another one if something happens to it. There's this warranty at Guitar Center. You can get these warranties. We bought this microphone. It's like super fragile, and not only is it, you buy the warranty and you can not only get the same microphone that you got before if it breaks, but you could trade in the value and put it towards something else. So like I bought this microphone and my husband and I bought it for like home recording, and I kind of had buyer's remorse about it. I was like, oh, I kind of wish I would have gotten the other one, like this one's not that good. And we had bought the warranty, so like if anything happened, if I dropped this thing, like I could take it back and put my money towards something else. I'm like, man, like if I were not a morally upstanding individual, I totally would have just like dropped that thing on the ground and broken it because I didn't want it anymore. I wanted a different one. I had buyer's remorse, and so I'm not so morally bankrupt as to completely trash the microphone just to get a free one, but I might be a little less careful with it than I otherwise would have. I was like, yeah, Mom, you can send it in the mail. It's fine. Yeah, sure, but. Anyway, so the moral hazard says we're going to change people's behavior due to some sort of transaction. And the best examples are things like warranties and insurance. So, like with car insurance, for example, let's say if you did not have car insurance, and your brother who is a terrible driver asked to borrow your car to take it out for the night, are you more or less likely to say no than if you have insurance and if something happens, it'll get covered?
You're more likely to say no.
If you have insurance?
If you don't have.
Yeah, if you don't have insurance, you're like, no, man, you cannot borrow my car. You don't have $10,000 to give me if you destroy it. But if you have insurance, you're like, sure, like borrow the car. If you wreck it, I'll still get the money for the car. So it's going to change like how you might behave and how much risk aversion you might use. Same thing with how you drive it. Like if you're late for something and you need to like rush through traffic, you might be more likely to do so a little bit more recklessly if you have insurance. So basically, the incentive to drive carefully has been reduced because now, if you get in an accident, you only have to pay that deductible. Just like, depending on how much your deductible is, it's going to affect that incentive. So then you change your behavior. So how does this apply to the health insurance markets? So how does moral hazard definitely plays a role in health insurance? David Cutler talked about it in his lecture. Jisoo?
So if you have insurance
yeah, so you might be more reckless. You're like, well, if I break my leg snow skiing, if I go off this jump that I probably shouldn't go off, like, it's gonna hurt, but at least I will not go bankrupt. You might be a little bit less careful. What else might you change? Did you have another?
No, I just think it's funny when you're saying things like that, like when you're talking about health insurance like that, because I don't personally when I make decisions that are like involve risk, like I weigh me hurting myself more than if I'm gonna like spend money.
And I think that's probably true. Like, there's might be some, like, I think the pain of breaking your leg is probably going to weigh more heavily in your decision than the financial risk you might be putting yourself in. But what's something that's not quite so much of the pain trade-off there?
Like you might decide to have like a surgery that wasn't necessary because it was going to be covered by insurance.
Yeah.
You have to pay for it yourself.
Right, so you might be willing to do a surgery. Okay, so surgery is also painful. But what if it's like a CT scan or like, you know, like I got an extra ultrasound for my baby. Ultrasounds are really cool. You gotta like see the baby. They're expensive. Like they cost like $1,000. And if I had to pay that myself, like I probably would have not done the second ultrasound or like the extra one. You know, that was like recommended sort of, but not like super necessary. So it changes like the number of ultrasounds that people are going to have. It changes the amount of the health services that people are going to consume. Do you see?
So, no one Cutler lectured about like low apathy, how people just unnecessarily get all this crap done for lower back pain, but it doesn't really help.
Yeah.
But in that situation, isn't it like the providers or like suggesting that stuff? So how does that work in terms of like more hybrid? Because it's not that the patient.
That would be adverse selection.
It could be adverse selection. So if you had, actually, let's talk about the principal agent problems. That could be looked at in that sense, where, and it's also segues into our next topic. So let's come back to that after we define the principal agent problem. Okay, so with the principal agent problem, basically you need to have, first let's talk about a principal agent relationship. Principal agent relationship. Basically, it's where you have an agent that's acting on the behalf of a principal. So one person is acting on the behalf of another. So let's think of some examples. Let's see, so agent and principal. So we could think about, like, to the extent to which doctors make decisions for patients. You know, patients definitely usually have the final say, but doctors have big influence on that. So in some sense, you could say that a doctor's recommendations are acting on behalf of the patients. What's another example of a principal and an agent relationship? What? Employers, right. So an employee, so who's the agent and who's the principal in that case? Exactly. So the employee is supposed to be helping the employer accomplish their goals of maximizing profit. What's another one? Yeah, Michael?
Patients and doctors also be switched potentially, depending on the situation.
Potentially. What are you thinking of?
Like the doctor will want to profit off from the patients, and so they have incentive to also provide more care because they get paid based on care given.
Right. So we'll talk about. So in that sense, I'm still thinking that the agent is acting on behalf, is making decisions, or making recommendations on behalf of the principal. But we'll talk about how the principal agent problem arises when those incentives are not aligned. So it's exactly where we're going. So just real quick, a couple other examples are like the CEO is acting on the behalf of the shareholders. And one of the issues that I look at with energy efficiency is that the landlord, my landlord decides what kind of furnace he wants to put into our apartment, but I'm the one who has to pay the bills. I have to pay the energy bill, but my landlord gets to decide what kind of furnace he's going to put in. So there's this principal-agent relationship there. So now, when does this relationship, so it's not always a problem. Because here's another example that we've talked about before, was like literally like an agent is acting on behalf of a sports, like a athlete. So let's talk about when this is a problem. And it needs to have two conditions met in order for the principal-agent relationship to become a principal-agent problem. So a problem arises if these two conditions are met. And the first one is we have to have an information asymmetry. So the principal and the agent have different levels of information. Usually the principal doesn't have full information about what the agent is doing. So we have asymmetric information. And the second one is that we have divergent interests or goals, or divergent incentives. Okay, so the classic example of the employee and the employer, going back to our NCAA tournament, like the goal of the employee, the interest, divergent incentives, goals, or interests. So the interest of the employer is to get the most productivity as they can out of the worker. And the interest of the worker is to get a paycheck, to not get fired, and probably not to slave away as much. I mean, they have more incentives. They have an incentive to want to check Facebook. They have an incentive to watch the NCAA tournament. And they have other goals that they would like to accomplish. The employer has no goal whatsoever or interest in the employer checking Facebook or watching the NCAA tournament. So there's a divergence there. And they also have asymmetric information. Unless your boss is standing over your shoulder the entire day and watching exactly what you're doing, then you've got an information asymmetry. What's one thing how technology has kind of increased or decreased the information asymmetry between employers and employees, at least with regards to the internet? Sometimes the internet use is monitored by the employers. So if you're spending too much time, or they'll even block sites, which has consequences in terms of worker satisfaction and morale. But you can still just stare off into space while you have your spreadsheets open. There's definitely asymmetric information in terms of effort. So they have divergent incentives and goals and asymmetric information, and that might cause them to have this principal-agent problem arise. So let's go back to this idea of the doctors and the patients. So what's the goal of the patient? Health. You want to get better. You want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your own health. That back pain example. You want to improve this back pain. And what's the goal of the doctor? So let's give the doctor some credit. They're definitely concerned about the health of the patient. But what else are they concerned about? Their paycheck and
not getting sued.
Not getting sued, exactly. It's a big one. So not getting sued, how much they're getting paid, maybe their prestige. They have pressures from the management, various things. So when a patient comes in with back pain, they both want to help reduce their back pain. But maybe the best decision would be to say, hey, you really ought to start going to yoga every day. and that'll help your back pain. But first of all, the patient might want more intervention, and second, because they feel like you're doing something. And then also with the doctor, they don't want to get sued, and they want to improve their, if they actually go ahead and do a back surgery instead of just saying, hey, go home and do yoga, their pay might increase. They might have a profit incentive to do that. Same thing with, it's like the biggest, one of the biggest determinants of whether you get heart surgery or like medication to reduce your blockage is like how many heart surgeons you have in that hospital. It's like if heart surgery is what you do, then you're more likely to do heart surgery. But if the end goal is patient health, sometimes you might have some divergence between those goals. So with the principal agent problem, you have asymmetric information and divergent incentives. So then when you think about how do we reduce this problem? So how do we mitigate the problem? Any ideas? Elizabeth?
We try to align incentives between.
Exactly. So we want to align the incentives. So for that employee, you might say, well, we'll give you stock options, or especially for that CEO, oftentimes they'll get a share of the profit or a bonus based on the overall output of the company. So they try to give you some, they try to make your incentives align with the company's incentives. And what's the problem with the problem with the CEO getting a share of the profits is that if the CEO thinks, should I be flying first class or should I fly business class or coach? If he chooses to fly coach, he's going to increase the profits of the company, and he's going to get, some 1% share of that improvement in profits. But if he flies first class, he gets the full benefit of flying first class. He gets to capture that full benefit. So it's still hard to align the incentives entirely, but you can do you can try to improve the scenario by aligning incentives. What's the other way that you can mitigate the problem? So here's the two ways the problem arises. So aligned incentives addresses this divergent incentives issue. Let's see, Jisoo, is that again?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that both parties have the same information.
Right. So instead, we can try to overcome the information asymmetry. So you can either have better monitoring of your employees, or having patients educate themselves about different options might be a way to do that. Dr. Google, as they say, could be a dangerous thing, though. But yeah, so there's a couple ways you can mitigate the problem. It still tends to be pretty persistent because it's difficult to overcome both asymmetric information and divergent incentives. All right, guys, that's the semester. It's been awesome. I might, I'm not teaching next spring. I might not teach next year even. This could be my last F10 section of all time. It's possible. Depends. We'll see. But definitely come into office hours, and then I'll have review sessions. And then next semester I'll send you pictures of